Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's all about Mike Conley. Last year's trade deadline acquisition, a huge part of what the Wolves were able to do at the end of the year, making it all the way through the play-in into the playoffs. What he brought to the team, what to expect from Mike Conley this year, what his role will be on both ends of the floor. We'll also talk about today's preseason opener, Wolves-Mavericks from Abu Dhabi, what to watch for in that game. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody, and a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, along with all the other Minnesota Locked On podcasts. And now is the best time to do that. We, of course, are really about in the kind of the thick of football season. And, of course, the Minnesota Twins representing here again today, winning their first playoff game in 19 years and first playoff series in 21 years. And on to Houston this weekend for the ALDS. So be sure to tune in to, if you subscribe to Locked On Sports Minnesota on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, you'll get this show. You'll also be able to watch Locked On Twins, Locked On Golden Gophers, Locked On Wild, Locked On Vikings. Everything is over there. Again, both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, I want to spend most of the show here today talking about Mike Conley. Of course, Conley, the trade deadline acquisition last season, and made a huge difference for the Timberwolves down the stretch in his 24 regular season games, the play-in games, and the 5 playoff games he appeared in for the Wolves. I want to talk about what his role was, what was different about what he did in Minnesota versus what he had done the last several years in Utah prior to that. Also, what we can expect this year from Conley. And then later in the show, we will get to Wolves-Mavs preseason game today, Thursday. It's actually an 11 a.m. Central tip from Abu Dhabi, the other side of the world, but 11 a.m. Central. And then they play again Saturday, same time, both games on NBA TV. So Friday's show here at Locked On Wolves will be a post-game pod. I'll break down what we saw on Thursday. I haven't yet seen any indication about who else. We'll talk about this later, I guess, but who's going to play, who's not going to play, who's going to play, how much the starters will play. Because it's an NBA international game, I would imagine that the league would like the Wolves to play some of their starters, but I don't know how many minutes we're going to see out of those guys. Maybe it's the first 8 minutes of the game and that's it, something like that. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Let's start with Mike Conley. So when the Wolves traded for Mike Conley last year, actually back up a little bit. Prior to the trade deadline, there were a number of different veteran point guard types, names that were being bandied about as possible trade targets for the Timberwolves, Kyle Lowry of the Miami Heat being one of them as well. The reason why Mike Conley was the most attractive, I think, to the Timberwolves, rewinding now several months, was combination of his familiarity with Rudy Gobert. He's a better defender than Kyle Lowry, and the contract was a little bit less, the same length, which was partial guarantee, but a most like a 3/4 contract guarantee for what is now going to be this coming season. So there was a slight advantages to Conley from a salary standpoint and from a familiarity standpoint. And also he's, I think, a couple years younger than Lowry. And I, like I said, slightly a better defender, or certainly a better defender. However, Conley made his only all-star team in the 2020-2021 season. That's the year that was shortened on the front end by COVID. And there were the, back-to-backs and all that season. He was an all-star that year in Utah. He was quite good for the first part of the next season. But really the most of that next season and the first half of last year before he was traded to Minnesota saw Conley struggle a little bit, saw him take a clear step backwards defensively, especially early last season in Utah. And on offense, that final Utah year, right? The 21-22 season, which was Gobert's last year in Utah. It was Donovan Mitchell's last year in Utah. That squad still finished with 49 wins. They had the best offensive rating in the entire league. They were I guess they were the 5 seed that year in the Western Conference, and they lost in 6 games to the Dallas Mavericks. That team, Mike Conley struggled. Rudy Gobert had moments where he struggled, and it's what really, Quinn Snyder moved on after the season. The Mavericks broke up the band, that whole thing. Excuse me, the Mavericks. The Jazz broke up the band, and Conley was a big part of those struggles. He was still on the team last season. He was in Utah for the first 43 games of the season, and I kind of looked the same as he did the year prior. And it was really like, hey, this guy's long in the tooth. He's 35 years old. He early in his career, he prided himself on this tough, hard-nosed defense. He was a pretty limited offensive player early in Memphis, like back in the, 08, 09, 10, 11, those years. He was all defense all the time. I remember there were Conley, Ricky Rubio debates. You guys, do you remember that? Like, now we're talking like 15 years ago at this point, almost 15 years ago, 12 years ago. It was like, who's better, Conley or Rubio? And it was a real debate for a couple of seasons there because neither one was a dynamic shooter. I mean, Conley had a couple of seasons where he was around 40%, but he didn't shoot a ton. That was still really the only differentiator, right? He wasn't great at the rim. He didn't do much else offensively other than shoot threes. And Rubio was seen as a better passer. They were both good defenders. Obviously, Conley ended up being the much better player overall for his career. He's had a little bit better injury luck. He had a couple of bad, injury luck seasons in there. The 17-18 season sticks out. I think it was a knee that he had that year. I think it was a knee. Maybe it was an Achilles, something like that. He only played in 12 games. But besides that, generally better injury luck than Ricky Rubio, but they were seen as similar players. Defense first, whatever you get from them offensively, that's great. And then he turned into somebody who could really score. By the end of his career in Memphis, he was averaging 18 points per game. He had a 22-point per game season. And then in Utah, that role stayed the same in that he was still relied upon to score, but he wasn't an offensive focal point. And there was actually an article, a timely article published in The Athletic by the fantastic John Krasinski the other day. Actually, this might have just been Wednesday, about Mike Conley's shifting role in Minnesota. And Conley has a quote in there where he said, let's see, where was it? He said he thought he was trending toward him just shooting, quote, toward just corner spot-up shots, being a spacer, and guarding guys around the court. That's where he thought his career was headed. That's where it was headed in Utah. And that's where he thought he would be in Minnesota too. And he was refreshed and in a sense rejuvenated in his 24, games, regular season games in Minnesota last year, because Chris Finch wanted him to do more than simply shoot spot up threes and just guard whoever, as he said, guard guys around the court, not be a primary point of attack defender. And he thought that's where his career was. Although I dug into the numbers a little bit, and I thought those comments were interesting because if you actually look at what Conley did in the Wolves uniform, again, extremely, really painfully small sample, a couple dozen games, it wasn't all that different than what he was doing in Utah from a shot distribution standpoint. And I don't know if it's just a feel thing and he feels like he's more, like if he's saying this because it's a feeling that's not backed up by numbers, like it's just a different role, because he's not doing the same thing as he was in Utah, where a lot of it was give the ball to Donovan Mitchell, have him operate pick and roll, go stand in the corner. There's some of that with Ant in the Timberwolves offense, but we're not going to get all the way there yet, because Conley and Rudy have much better chemistry than Ant and Rudy did at any point last season. Cat was not healthy for, at least half of the time Conley was in Minnesota late last season. So I think it's pretty interesting, because I don't think the reality of it necessarily lines up with what Conley feels like it does. So I want to get into some of those numbers here in just a minute, talk about his shot distribution, his assist rate, catch and shoot stuff, like all those things that Mike Conley's good at, and what his couple dozen and a half, if you include the playoffs, games in Minnesota look like compared to the last couple of seasons prior to that in Utah. So we'll get to all that here next. I think it's really fascinating. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Birddogs. Birddogs are the shorts and pants that make you look good. Simply put, I wear them almost every single day, wherever I go. I love to wear them throughout the weekend. I'm coaching flag football this Saturday. I will wear them to coach flag football. We'll stop at the store after. I'm going to run to the store. I'll come home. I'll probably take a shower in there somewhere, and then I'll put on a different pair of Birddogs. We'll grill out on Saturday. We'll go do something Saturday evening with the kids. All weekend long, I will be wearing Birddogs. And also, it's almost time where I live. It's warm enough. I'm still wearing the shorts, but I also have a pair of the lined pants. I can't wait to break those out too. They are stretch khaki shorts and pants that are designed to fit slimmer through your thigh and your leg. They give you a uniquely sculpted look. They have a liner. They have sweat wicking fabric. They help you look fresh and smell fresh. They are by far my favorite shorts and pants, and I'll be wearing them all 4 seasons now that I'm all the way on board with Birddogs. Right now, if you order your Birddogs, you can get a free gift water bottle as well, which is fantastic. I have the coffee tumbler, I guess that's a travel mug, and it's phenomenal. The water bottle, no doubt, is the same quality. So right now, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, enter the promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout. You'll get a free Birddogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle at checkout. I cannot say enough about Birddogs. They are the best shorts and pants I've ever owned, bar none. And you won't want to take your Birddogs off once you get them. I can promise you that. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, every day or tomorrow on the show, it'll be the post-game pod. We'll be talking all about Wolves-Mavs from Thursday in Abu Dhabi. Excited to actually break down a game. I mean, we did this a little bit with Team USA, a little bit with Summer League, but like a real-ish, but at least full Timberwolves post-game pod. Well, I think I'll break out key takeaways and studs and duds Friday, kind of dust off that format, see how we feel, and try and get into midseason form here quickly. We'll do the same thing Monday following Saturday's second preseason game in Abu Dhabi against those same Dallas Mavericks. So look forward to post-game pods Friday and Monday. We'll be back on player previews next week as well. We're into the starting lineup now with Mike Conley, so we got 4 more after the Conley episode that we'll get to here next week. All right, continuing on the Mike Conley discussion. So let's talk some numbers. Well, Conley talked in this article, the Athletic article that came out on Wednesday with John Krasinski, about his expanded role in Minnesota, being asked to do more things. If you look at his numbers, shot distribution numbers with the Wolves versus the year prior in Utah, it's actually pretty fascinating. The number of pull-up threes that he shot is almost identical to what he did the year before. Corner threes, not pull-up threes. Actually, it is identical. He shot 17% of his three-point attempts this last season, split between Utah and Minnesota, was 17%. 17% of his overall three-point shots were from the corners. In Utah, 21-22, exactly 17% of his three-point shots were coming from the corners. No difference. And it's funny, and I know that he wasn't only talking about shooting from the corners, but that's the example he gave. Like, he thought it was, hey, dump the ball off, run to the corner. That was what he was afraid he would be doing because it's what he was doing in Utah. Well, guess what, Mike Conley? You shot the exact same, number, not the exact same number, the exact same rate of corner threes this last season as you did the year prior. 17% of his three-point attempts from the corner, 83% above the break in both 21-22 and 22-23. I thought that was really interesting. Catch and shoot was very similar. He shot 44% of his threes were catch and shoot this last season. Again, split between Utah and Minnesota. 44% of his three-point attempts were catch and shoot. 32% the year before in Utah were catch and shoot. So yes, he was doing more catching and shooting, doing more spotting up. That's exactly what the Wolves want him to do, though. And I know Chris Finch is saying, like, oh yeah, get your offense, because you can't let guys, assume you're not going to score. You have to keep defenses honest so they can't load up on Ant. That's true, but that's still going to be catching and shooting. It's going to be spot up shooting threes, right? That's why almost half of his three-point attempts last year were catch and shoot, and a large number were from the corner, but or a fair number, nearly 1 out of every 5. That's not going to change. That three-point attempt frequency, it's going to stay a lot of catch and shoot. Conley doesn't shoot out of the pick and roll as often as D'Angelo Russell did. D'Angelo Russell squeezed the trigger far more often as a ball handler in pick and roll than Mike Conley's going to. And yeah, it's good that he can do it a couple times a game to keep a defense honest. But the Wolves want Ant operating in the middle of the floor. They want Karl-Anthony Towns operating in the middle of the floor. Mike Conley is fantastic at running the offense, slowing things down, getting things to the right person. And then he can also obviously defend. But then, like, say Ant's off the floor, Conley can run that pick and roll. If Ant's on the floor, Conley's that perfect person to be spotting up from outside the arc. In Minnesota, he saw his usage tick up slightly, very slightly. And by that, I mean, again, this is small sample. I get it. 43 games in Utah last year, 16.1% usage rate. In Minnesota in 24 games, so a little more than half that number, 16.8%. So 0.7% more or higher usage, I should say. The assist rate, though, much lower. In fact, his assist rate in 24 games in Minnesota, if it were a whole season, which it wasn't, would have been his lowest assist rate of any season in his, 16-year career, which is incredible. And before that, it was 34%, which would have been, for a full season, his second highest assist rate in his entire career. So we saw basically his best assist season over those 43 games, season in quotes, and his worst assist rate season in quotes, 24 games in Minnesota after the deadline. Why is that? Well, sample size has something to do with it, because all things considered, the full season actually looks pretty similar. It's right in line with his career assist rate, right? So that's the biggest thing. And I'll be upfront with that. It's mostly because you want to take the season as a whole. But Minnesota and Utah are playing, Utah of last season and Minnesota of last season are playing differently. Conley was running the show in Utah because who else would be running the show? And I know Lauri Markkanen was a high usage guy eventually, and they were getting the ball to Kessler a little bit more, but there was no Donovan Mitchell. There was no Rudy Gobert. There was no, that was the team, right? That was the Jared Vanderbilt early season, Malik Beasley early season, Utah Jazz being scrappy and doing some stuff. And overall, Conley wasn't as good, but the assist rate was really good. He comes to Minnesota. He sees the usage rate tick up slightly, the assist rate plummet, the free throw rate go up a little bit, and also the 3-point rate. This is another small sample size theater, but the 3-point rate last season in 24 games with the Wolves, if it were extrapolated over an entire season, would have been his highest 3-point rate of any stop previously in his career, any individual season. His 3-point percentage was also the highest, 42%, would have been higher than any other single season. Again, the season as a whole, the numbers are more in line, but it just goes to show how good he was in a Timberwolves uniform and that he was playing a little bit differently, even though the actual shot distribution in terms of corner 3-point shots and pull-up threes, catch and shoot threes, was very similar to what he'd done the previous year. It wasn't the what he did in Minnesota after the trade deadline was the way he went about it was different. The results ended up being similar, but the way he went about it was different because he was dominating the ball less. Anthony Edwards had the ball in his hands more often, and he was able to play off the ball, but yet still attack. And that was kind of the gist of the article over at The Athletic was because Mike Conley could do so many different things, right? And that is that's kind of the goal of bringing him in, right? He's so much more of a steady hand. And I talked about this back at the deadline. D'Angelo Russell, the highs were really high. The lows were really low. Mike Conley, yes, there were a couple scoreless games. Yes, there were, several single-digit scoring nights. But everything else about it is consistent, and he will consistently knock down an open three when given the opportunity. D'Angelo Russell was far streakier in that sense. The Wolves didn't need D'Angelo Russell to try and play here at the end of games because they had Anthony Edwards to do that. And a healthy Karl-Anthony Towns will be able to do that as well. We've seen those guys hit big shots too. D'Lo, everybody knew what he was going to do at the end of the game. The Timberwolves can get it to Ant, and he can go to the basket. He can shoot a three. He can shoot from the mid-range if he needs to. Cat, same thing. These guys are true three-level scorers. And D'Lo, well, in theory he was. It was rarely that in practice. And I hate to turn every Conley conversation into a D'Lo conversation, but it's a very real comparison. That was the trade, right? They're replacing D'Lo with Mike Conley. And what I've said before on the show is in a vacuum, you could still convince me D'Angelo Russell's the better player. In a vacuum right now, D'Angelo Russell's probably the better player. But who's the better fit for Minnesota's roster? Unequivocally, it's Mike Conley. He can be lower usage. He's a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter. A lot of people don't understand that. Going back 3 seasons, Mike Conley is a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter clearly than D'Lo. D'Lo's good. Conley's great. Great in terms of catch and shoot threes. He's easily a better defender. And by the way, was much better defensively in a Minnesota Timberwolves uniform last year than he had the previous year and a half in Utah. I would even say after the deadline, Conley seemed to be rejuvenated on defense. Like ESPN defensive real plus minus, that was down on him. Like his number a couple years ago, he was like top 6 or 7 in the NBA in defensive real plus minus. Last year, he actually had a negative among point guards, I should say, a negative defensive real plus minus. But the B-ball index numbers really liked Mike Conley's season. They actually had him as I believe it was an A in perimeter isolation defense. I'm going to verify that here, but I'm pretty sure that's what they had. Yeah, they had him as an A with perimeter isolation defense. And I mean, that's significant, right? Like the Wolves have Jaden McDaniels. They're not asking him to guard on the perimeter like um, the best scoring wing on the other team. Just guard the point of attack well. He was 93rd percentile in on-ball perimeter defense. Grades out as an A according to B-Ball Index. He was an A+ in ball screen navigation, 97th percentile. You know who else was an A+? Jaden McDaniels. Timberwolves have 2 A+ in ball screen navigation. Anthony Edwards is up there too. Now, he's much better in isolation than he is navigating ball screens. He can kind of get lost in the wash sometimes when he gets screened. But that's why you have Conley and McDaniels, and Ant is the other guy, right? Ant can be the other guy. Put him on the high usage wing that's just in isolation situations and put him one-on-one, and will be up to the challenge. Conley can chase the ball handler. McDaniels can do both, which is why he's the best defender on the team and one of them in the league. But Conley's the perfect fit because he can do those things. He's savvy, effective defensively, far better than D'Lo was. And that's, I think, where he's going to make the biggest difference. Yes, he's a better fit offensively. Yes, he's a marginally better, not marginally, he is a significantly better three-point shooter, catch and shoot three-point shooter than D'Lo. And I just think it's a more synergistic fit. The Rudy Conley pick and roll should be good for a bucket or two a game. We've talked about that before. But defensively, D'Lo was below average most of the time. Conley's going to be above average to well above average most of the time. And that's going to be the biggest difference. For a team that already was a top 10 defensive rating team, you take the body work as a whole last year, some of that with D'Lo, some of it with Conley, they were a top 10 defensive rating team. We're going to see that again this year. And Finch has been talking about all week at training camp, this being a defense first team. Conley, McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, absolutely this is a defense first team. You better find a way to score the ball a little bit. They were 23rd in offensive efficiency last year. We've talked about that quite a bit on the show. There's work to be done there. There's enough talent though, and Finch is it's supposed to be his deal, right? Is figuring out creative offenses. It didn't happen last year, but the cat injury was a major had a major impact on that. All that to say, Conley's impact in the defensive end of the floor is going to be a huge deal this year. There's no question about that. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little preseason, what to watch for, and what I'm going to keep an eye out for in the Wolves-Mavs preseason debut in Abu Dhabi. We're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Snap into NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers at FanDuel can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. It's also MLB postseason. We talked about that earlier. The Twins in the ALDS. Hopefully the ALDS against the Houston Astros this weekend. Of course, lots of football action, and the app at FanDuel is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and kick off the NFL season. We're just in week 5? Vikings got their first win last weekend. The Gophers have a winning record. Big game against Michigan Saturday night for the Golden Gophers. Again, new customers at FanDuel get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is place a $5 bet. Again, $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, let's close this thing out by talking a little Wolves-Mavs in Abu Dhabi. We don't know exactly who all is going to play for both these teams, but being that it's an NBA international game, I think we'll probably see most of the starting lineup for both teams. Some guys may play more than others. I know, 2-3 games of the preseason, we may see the starting lineup play all the first quarter and most of the third quarter or something like that. Maybe we'll get 5 to 8 minutes out of the starters. That would be my hunch, is that they all start and play a little bit. The most intriguing thing for me is maybe the first guys off the bench. And again, game 1 of the preseason, right? So who knows? We won't know if this is a thing until we see whether or not there's a pattern come Saturday, come next week. Who's the first off the bench? Who comes back first? And what do the Wolves do after halftime? Do they bring the starters back in? Is the pattern similar? And specifically the big man rotation, I think will be really fascinating. I recorded a brief plug for the Minnesota basketball party. Actually, if you're listening to the Locked On Wolves feed, if you're not watching on YouTube, you're listening on your favorite audio platform. The episode before this was the debut episode of the Minnesota basketball party, which is myself. It's Reggie Wilson, who's the KARE 11 sports anchor. Ron Johnson of the Ron Johnson Show and Locked On Sports Network, former Golden Gopher, former NFL wide receiver. and the fantastic Jack Borman from Canis Hoopus. He's the managing editor, site editor, whatever his title is over at Canis Hoopus. They're all fantastic and hosted by Sam Ekstrom, who does a great job. But Jack brought up on the show, he was really curious to see what the big man rotation looks like, as Finch has alluded to, possibly staggering Cat and Rudy a bit more spread out, if you will, where, yes, they're going to start together and they're going to overlap a little bit, but making sure that basically one of them is on the floor most of the time. Now, if that's the case, that means Naz Reid's going to play a whole lot of power forward, which is interesting because I still think Naz's best cast is a small ball five. Well, the Wolves aren't going to play that way a ton, which is one of the reasons I was dubious about extending Naz. Again, if you missed my whole take on it, the cliff notes are, I'm good with the Naz signing based on the value, what they got him for. But I'm curious to see what he, like Naz at the 4 and Kyle Anderson at the 3. It's nice to be big, but I think Naz is better at the 5 and Kyle Anderson's at the 4. So how does Chris Finch manage this rotation? And again, I think in preseason, it's going to be more who's the first off the bench, what does the big man rotation look like, and how does it change over the course of preseason? What is Chris Finch trying to accomplish? I think that'll be really interesting. I don't know if they're going to do anything too crazy offensively or anything at this stage. And hopefully nobody's going too hard. Hopefully we see a little Leonard Miller. I would think we probably would, especially if we see very little of Cat and Rudy. Perhaps we see, like, obviously Naz and, probably I assume two-way guys are going to be like Luka Garza will probably get some run. But it would be really good to see Leonard Miller get in the game. I mean, that's kind of it in terms of backup bigs. Josh Minott, I guess, would be like guys I'm excited to watch. Newcomers, sure. Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., their minutes will probably be fairly limited as well. But Josh Minott and Leonard Miller would be the guys that I'm most excited to watch beyond just kind of like, what does this rotation look like? Does Jordan McLaughlin look like he's got some life to him? Wendell Moore Jr., we saw him in Summer League. I don't think a whole lot was different then. Maybe now, like we'll see. I'm sure he plays a bunch in this game. But rotation will be the most intriguing thing. And we'll see how that evolves over the course of the preseason. Like, what are the things that Chris Finch is trying? They may be subtle. It may not be super obvious. So try and pick up on some of those. And what pairings is he trying to kind of isolate and make sure that these, player A plays with player B? And again, they play again Saturday, same matchup. So probably similar approaches to those two games. You're overseas. They don't come back and play stateside until I think middle of next week. So they get some time to kind of unpack everything, but literally and figuratively what happened overseas. But it'll be pretty interesting to see how that all shakes out. All right. So again, we'll do the post-game pod Friday. That's Friday's show. We'll focus on that game on Friday. We'll do the same Monday. We'll probably also do a player review Monday as well, or player preview, I should say. We'll be a couple of days removed from Saturday at that point. And then we'll finish off the starting lineup next week. We'll cover more preseason games. And we're just a couple weeks out from actual regular season basketball. So get excited for that. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.